Well, the main question is, were MI5 operating any of these homes for the purpose of allowing illegal acts to take place?
The only person I knew personally in the services was Oldfield, and he went there. My letters...
You're saying Sir Maurice Oldfield attended?
Yeah, that's right. The only person I had, his biographer wrote to me a number of times to interview me about it. I said I couldn't, because my letters about Oldfield to Captain Peter Montgomery in Northern Ireland could not be revealed because they were before the High Court.
How do we know Oldfield attended one of these homes, the Kincora home or any other
I
home?
don't say he did.
We thought you did.
You just said Oldfield went there.
No, he went to Northern Ireland,
not to one of the homes.
and he was involved with a group.
Sorry.
He had been interviewed in, Anthony Blunt had been interviewed in Oldfield's flat when Oldfield was in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
I had seen Anthony Blunt the day before he made his confession. I was very much involved with Anthony Blunt at this time because, as you know, his closest friend in the Secret Service was, in fact, not a man, but a whole family of people who got this, was supposed to be the greatest deception of the war, deceiving the Germans, which I was involved with, and whose family, Thomas Harris, of course, is today dead. His sisters are still alive. His sister, of course, was the most famous of the J3, Enriqueta, the spies. She's still alive, one of my closest friends. So I know all this group from the war, from the Minister of Information down. I am only concerned that the security services can use the law courts for gagging writs.
I think that's actually a separate matter. I mean, before we move on to that, perhaps, Mr. Ramsey, could just outline for us as carefully, obviously, as you can, what actually Mr. Hubbins is referring to here. What is the
bit?
Well, I mean, it's obviously I'm talking about the Kincora alleged scandal.
Kincora. Well, roughly speaking, Kincora was a boys' home under the control of Belfast City Council, I think, which was run by a group of the staff became, sorry, let me try again. The home became run by a group of Northern Irish militant Protestants who were also homosexuals. The home, this was discovered, and MI5 stroke British Army Intelligence had an agent in Kincora because of the fact that there were senior radical Orangemen buggering kids and taking photographs. And photographs have been seen. Was obviously a gold mine, an intelligence gold mine, because in 1973-74, when the British state was wrestling with the IRA on one hand, and the UDA and the UVF and all the rest of it on the other, this kind of dirt was just wonderful stuff. And they had a guy in there who made weekly reports, and so on and so on. So now, Kincora story is incredibly complicated, but essentially it became a faction fight inside the British intelligence in Northern Ireland. One group, I think Army Intelligence, was basically disgusted by it, wanted to leak it, and the other group, basically MI5, said no, this is too good to miss. That's what the story is. Now, as I understand it, the bit where it impinges on Mr. Harbinson's story is that Mr. Harbinson has written of in various letters that have been injuncted, but which are floating around, of an Anglo-Irish upper-class homosexual network. And at the far edge of this network, somebody was procuring boys for this homosexual network. Now, as he said, it's not Kincora because the boys are too old. Kincora was 16 plus, I think. But some of the other homes had younger people. And so I assume people with paedophilic inclinations made use of the other homes. I don't know which one he's referring to.
What was Anthony Blunt's involvement?
He was just part of the social group, as far as I know. I mean, this man is the expert. Hardly ask me about Anthony Blunt. Have I done you justice, sir?
Yes, Anthony Blunt in Northern Ireland started in 1921 when his father became rector of St. John the Evangelist of Paddington. And he met this first Orangeman. The first and most important one was your old colleague in the House of Commons, Lord Robert Grosvenor, who became Duke of Westminster. My great friend for a long time, until he decided to put me in the doghouse. Why? Because Anthony Blunt wanted me there. We had this quarrel. You must realize that, and we go back to the Duke of Westminster, you must realize that why did he go to Northern Ireland to live? In an obscure place like Ely Lodge, where you stayed, where we both stayed. Why? Because his grandfather, the Earl of Erne, was the Grand Master of the Orange Order.
Yes, that was one reason.
Yes, the Orange Order has got a very great deal to do with this gentleman's allegations here tonight.
Not my allegations. I merely report other people.
Yes. In the late 60s, the Duke of Westminster very much hoped that he would become the Imperial Master of the Grand Orange Order. He didn't. My cousin did. We are very closely connected. I've known Pud, you see, when he was a very poor man, not the richest man in Europe. There's all this part of Anthony Blunt had to be protected.
He was given immunity in 1960.
Yes, but what did that immunity cover?
Everything.
Did it cover Captain Peter Montgomery, his friend in Northern Ireland?
Blanket immunity is blanket immunity.
For him, but for other people. You must remember that it wasn't Anthony Blunt who was personally writing the letters from the Courtauld Institute about me. It was his friend, Captain Peter Montgomery, the President of the Arts Council of Northern Ireland.
You see, the problem that we've got, some of us here, and I'm sure the people watching us have got, is that they don't really understand what the background to all this is.
No, they don't.
Terribly difficult.
It's very, very complicated. Now, when Blunt was exposed as a traitor in 79, Fleet Street left off all over the place. Most of them came to a place called Blessingbourne in County Tyrone, the home of Captain Peter Montgomery. The press looked at the guest book there, and what did they see? They saw that Anthony Blunt and myself had been guests there in the early 60s. I was a guest there in the 60s. Of what? The government of Northern Ireland. The government of Northern Ireland had invited me to go back and write a book called Ulster.
I thought you were going to confess to something interesting there.
Well, I hope the background of why Anthony Blunt is interfering so much in the affairs of Northern Ireland. You see, you keep on about this Concora thing. I'm not very interested in Concora.
Well,
I'm very interested
were
in...
MI5 operating the Kincora home as an MI5
I'm
operation?
interested in something
Yes,
much
they were.
more important, and that is the downfall of the government of the lawfully elected government of Harold Wilson. That is what concerns me.
That's nothing to do with Kincora.
It concerns the same people in Northern Ireland who wanted to see Wilson out. Those cabinet ministers who wanted to see Wilson out came to see me.
Name them.
I will not name them. They will come out. Their letters are...
In a year's time, we won't even have this programme. Name them now. It's probably your last chance on television.
No.
You could be famous in the morning.
I am not interested in that sort of thing. They are still alive today.
These are people in Northern Ireland.
No. There are people that you know. There are people who literally kicked Wilson out of office.
What did they do to kick him out of office?
They kicked Wilson out of office, and they got themselves into high places. This is why Mrs. Thatcher consults them today.
How did they go about that?
How? Because they were blackmailed.
Over what?
Sex.
I think we ought to come back to a slightly more general
Yes, I think so.
comprehensible point. I find myself again this evening slightly stupefied by this, because we know what Peter Wright said about the attempt to discredit the Labour government by controlled leaks, by extraordinary stories through the appalling Cecil King and his mirror, through the general dirty tricks. And that must arouse in us the suspicion that the Conservative government has an interest in keeping the security services well muffled so that they can go on with a potential capacity to rubbish any opposition, which would fit in with the authoritarianism that alas plagues us today. The other point, it seems to me, is that what pales into insignificance is Anthony Blunt and Philby selling secrets to the Russians. That seems to me to matter a good deal less than Anthony Blunt and Philby and many others controlling the flow of information to the policymakers, to the government, and thereby influencing government policy. It seems to me that that's a risk that we ought to be looking at, less matters of people selling secrets or disclosing secrets or betraying things to the Russians, more trying to manipulate government policy by carefully feeding the right information, true or manufactured, to policymakers and ministers.